Welcome to the Skipton Talks podcast with me, Derek Adams.
And me, Jonathan Evans.
Our latest news and views from the intermediary mortgage market. Subscribe now on all popular streaming services.
Skipton Talks is for intermediary use only. Any opinions are from individuals and may not reflect the views of the company they represent. Hello and welcome back to Skipton Talks, the series where we discuss the latest news and views with experts from across the intermediary mortgage market. In this episode, I'm joined by Steph Charman, Sesame Bankhall Group Strategic Relationship Director, and much like the last few weeks in the mortgage market, this conversation is going to be a bit of a roller coaster. We'll touch on the downs and the ups of the last month and the pressure that puts on brokers and their clients. Plus, Steph's going to share her experience with the menopause and explain how you can support your colleagues and the other important women in your life. So let's get started, Steph. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me to come and talk to you today, Jonathan.
No worries. Thanks for coming all the way up to Leeds. Would you like to start us off chatting over what's been happening in the market the last 4 weeks in review for some of the listeners?
Has something happened in the market in the last 4 weeks? No, I'm joking. It's been an interesting time, hasn't it? I think, and lots of people have talked around this. So let's cover it really high level. So, we saw the markets react to the mini budget. I think, we saw that fall in the value of sterling, and then we saw that rise in swap rates. Swap rates peaking at sort of 570 basis points at one point, that sort of Monday after that mini budget. And if I'm honest, I think, I'm quite an optimistic person, but even I sat there and we had some doom and gloom conversations around what does this mean? Where's the market going? And I think we could sit and talk for quite a long time around everything that happened in those few weeks in between. But actually, let's talk about the more optimistic part, because actually we did see lenders withdraw rates. You as Skipton sort of had to pull out, and we all understand, everybody understands the reasonings behind that. But actually, let's talk about where we are now, because I think that's actually it's definitely a more positive space than we have been. So maybe sort of a little bit of a question for you back.
Fire away.
But swap rates then, we started to see those start to come back. I think there is definitely a understanding that maybe bank-based rates and swap rates are sort of linked, and actually they're not really linked, definitely in the way the lenders do product pricing. We've started to see some lenders come back with some rate reductions. Is that, I want to be really optimistic here and say that's the trend that we're heading now towards? Is that, with new Prime Minister, etc., is that where you think we are?
Yeah, so obviously just very quickly for anybody out there, SONIA swap rates stands for SONIA Overnight Index Average, and that's the rate at which institutions borrow money to one another each day. They report it to the Bank of England by 7 a.m. in the morning, and then the Bank of England publish that rate at 10 a.m. And that's the rate at which institutions will borrow money to each other. It's been very volatile. The mini budget kicked it off, but that's us sort of looking back the way. The media, they take the story and they run with it. And the public, they get a lot of the bad news. But in actual fact, what's happened is when the Bank of England published they were going to be buying bonds back, the swap rates came down about 30 basis points. Then when the announcement came out that they were going to reverse the 45% higher rate tax, the swap rates came down again. But it's not really publicised well in the media. So the customers, the public, brokers, they always get the sort of the bad end of the story. What I would say now is definitely less volatile, which is a great thing. We're not out of the woods yet. We've still got a long way to go. So it will continue to be volatile, but it's not as choppy as what it was 4 weeks ago. But what's your sort of take on it as well, Steph?
Yeah, so that would definitely be our take on it. And I think you're quite right around those sort of headlines. And I saw a headline just this morning, actually, in one of the tabloid press around, mortgage payments could go up £2,000 a month. That's a really scary headline. And actually, probably for your average mortgage, really probably isn't the case. Yes, we are in for a rate shock. 12 months ago, we've got lenders offering sub 1% 2-year fixes. And that's not where we are today, nor will be the trajectory of travel for quite a long period of time. And actually, that low rate environment we've been in, we would have started to come out of that more slowly had we not had the COVID pandemic. So, yes, that was always the directory of travel. I think we've just seen it happen at sort of super speed, haven't we?
Yeah.
Which has caused the headlines that we've seen. And let's be honest, you touched on a lot of anxiety for customers.
Yeah.
Because, £2,000 a month on my mortgage, how am I going to afford that? It's, it's those headlines on top of the cost of living headlines. Let's be honest, watching the news is not positive, is it? Rising energy prices, your food bills going up, and now my mortgage. What do I do? Where do I go? How do I find any help? And that's where consumers are left in this state of panic.
Yeah, and I think it's the rate at which it's changed. It's grew at such an exponential rate. If you look back to sort of December last year to where we are now, base rate is significantly up. Swap rates are up. You've got a cost of living crisis, an energy crisis, and effectively now we've got a mortgage crisis. You could call it that. But the good news is, any crisis, there's always an end point to it. These times will pass. So I think in terms of moving forward, so as a lender, we are assessing quite a lot of information. In terms of affordability, so we've touched a bit on rates and the volatility in the market, and what it can do to the monthly payment. But in addition to that, with the rates moving at such a fast pace, a lot of lenders have had to recalibrate their stress rates for both buy-to-let and residential. And I don't know, how are your advisors finding that?
I mean, it's complicated, isn't it? Because it's changing on a sometimes even hourly basis, depending on where rates are, etc. We've already started to see this year a reduction down in affordability. So if you were borrowing X in January, that has significantly decreased once people have put sort of, ONS stats in, factored in those rising energy bills, plus then we've had the base rate increases that we've seen. So I think that was already starting to see a trajectory of travel. Obviously, it's been even more impacted by what we've seen so quickly in the last few weeks. So it's how do we, how do we navigate out of that? And I think for advisors, that's where, everything's been like a perfect storm for them. So not only have they got, as you said, changes in affordability, how do I navigate that? What my customer could borrow a week ago, they can't borrow now. You've then got rate changes, and the speed of which we saw the rate changes over the last few weeks is something like we've seen. We saw it in the pandemic, but it was slightly different then. There was a real sort of strong reason you can understand that whole market sort of ceased. But what we've seen in the last few weeks has been unprecedented. I hate that word, unprecedented, but I'm going to use it. Unprecedented, and it's trying to navigate. Well, if I tell a customer this rate is available now, it's available now. It might not be available in a few hours. That's a really difficult conversation to have, and to get a client to understand you're not trying to pressure them, but actually things are changing really, really quickly. And then the other part of, everything that, the media storm that we were talking around is just causing all of those additional questions, anxiety, customers phoning up, quite rightly, to their advisor to gain some insight. But how does an advisor deal with all of that at the same time as I said, rapid rate withdrawals? It's been really, really, really tough times. Not just for them. I get there's been tough times for lenders, but really tough times for advisors over the last few weeks.
Definitely agree. And personally, someone that works in the mortgage industry, I've worked in the industry for 17 years. My personal mortgage was due to mature the end of October. I went and I got a 6-month mortgage offer earlier in the year to try and hedge against the interest rate rises. And that was stressful for me. So for somebody that's got 17 years industry experience, how stressful and, how anxious, how depressed must some people be that are on the outside, and all they're getting is the mainstream media's viewpoint on it. So I think it is really important that we try and sort of focus on the future and how things are going to get better. Just to sort of touch on this sort of the sort of mental health side of things, have you got any tips for advisors, customers, people that work with lenders on how to manage that when we're in these uncertain times?
Oh gosh, I think there's personal things and there's sort of work. There's two sides to that, isn't there? I think for advisors, contacting your customer base, proactively contacting your customer base is really important. So, so they feel as though they're informed and they're not. They see that scary headline that we've touched on. Actually, they're saying, do you know what? My advisor's spoken to me. I know I don't need to worry because he's looking after me. He's got everything in hand. And I think it'd be interesting to see if this is a trend that you've picked up on, but. It's not just customers 6 months out of their mortgage deal. People are phoning up a year, 18 months, because they can see the trajectory of travel, or they believe they can see the trajectory of travel. So it's, what do I do? So actually contacting all of your customers to let them know that you're there for them. hopefully stops the reactive part, and it means you can be proactive. And from a Sesame Bankhall Group, there's lots of ways you can do that. We've brought in technology to help, so we've brought in Eligible to support, making that automated customer engagement tool to support. But there's lots of other ways you can do it, even if it's just blogs and emails out to your customer base. There's probably a piece around actually don't listen to the national news. But I shouldn't say that really, should I? But there is an element of don't listen to the national news all of the time. And then I think from a personal perspective, we've seen advisors, work till, midnight to make sure they get those applications in for for customers. They will go to the ends of the earth to do everything they possibly can to secure that rate. But that has an impact from a lender perspective as well. So as much as it's mental health and the stress and strain, that work home life well-being balance for advisors, as soon as that application tips over the line, it's then into yours as lenders' hands. And I'm sure you're seeing similar things from a capacity point of view and application processing.
Yeah, so Skipton, we're very lucky. We've invested heavily in technology and we've invested heavily in more people. So we do have brilliant people and we can do the human touch underwriting, but we've also got the tech advantage as well. And the advantage that has given us is it's allowed us to make quick decisions. So when we're getting cases in, and in a volatile market when rates can move so suddenly, what you're getting from Skipton is you're getting a fairly quick offer. So it's eliminating and removing some of the risk for the customer and some of the volatility when they're securing their interest rate. Because, for example, if you're having to wait 2 or 3 weeks for a decision, the market can move a long way in that period of time. How are the advisors dealing with that on the on the advice side and managing customers' expectations? I
think it's just you just hit the nail on the head. It's just about managing the customer's expectations. So as I said a moment ago, it's this is the rate at this moment in time, but rates are increasing, and that product could be withdrawn at any moment. This is how much you can borrow today on this rate. And I think I think there's setting the customer's expectations that that could change. But there's also then the fact that because it changes, that they have to revisit that. And sometimes they're having to revisit 2 or 3 times. So 2 or 3 times the amount of work for every single customer they're seeing and speaking to. One, that's not a good customer journey. So that's not good for the customer, because all they're seeing is every time they go back, that could be, and again, I don't want to be negative, but that could be you can borrow less at a higher rate than you could do 48, 72 hours ago. Or it could just be multiple decision in principles. We've tried to offer out help. One, we've got resource tools that allows, who does soft credit searches versus hard footprints. That's really important when we're operating in this really quick changing dynamic. You don't want to do lots of hard footprints on customers for definite. And also we've issued out a tool that says, okay, for lenders pulling a rate, what do you need to do to secure that product? Because every lender's slightly different. Some of it you can put a decision in principle in, and that reserves the rate for X number of days. Others need an actual full application put in. And by giving that sort of research at the fingertips for advisors, they can see, okay, I've got multiple lenders pulling in one day, which we have had. Actually, where do I focus first? And which bits do I get in? Which application, for which customer do I highlight and focus on and put as priority?
Yeah, so there is a lot happening in the market for brokers to digest. So it will be taking its toll. There'll be many a late night when they're getting emails from lenders pulling mortgage products. So what are some of the sort of coping mechanisms for brokers when they're dealing with this? So in fact, before I put that question to you, so at Skipton internally, we're very big on mental health. We have mental health first aiders within the business. I can't quite recall the number, but we've got a lot of mental health first aiders. So for staff and colleagues, we are in such a good place to support them. But just sort of thinking outside of the corporate world, the big corporates that we are so lucky to work for, what sort of support's there, or is there support functions for brokers, customers that you're aware of?
Yeah, so I agree. Again, sort of more sort of corporate setting, we've got our wellbeing champions who are, some of the sort of mental health first aiders as well, which gives that for staff that confidential sort of person to go and speak to, no matter what it might be, whether it's something, sort of health or financial or whatever that might look like. I think for advisors, a lot of them won't have access to those sort of helplines or people. So I think it is about creating your own network and having people that you can go to, talk to, other people in the office to sort of, rely on. I do think there's an element, as I said, they will go to the, they'll do everything they possibly can to do everything they can for that customer and secure those rates, those products, that get that application over the line. But also I think there's an element of be kind to yourself. There's only so much, they have been, everybody that works in this industry have been sort of mortgage heroes, I suppose, to a certain extent as we've gone through the last few weeks. But also be kind to yourself, because actually there's only so much any one person can actually do. So I think it's about making sure you've got a network of people you can talk to, use the services of, networks like ourselves and our account management functions and all the support and research tools that are there to try and just make that job just a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I think just a shameless plug here for business development managers. So at the moment, I'm a national account manager with Skipton. Previous to that, I was a business development manager in Scotland for 10 years. And part of that role, there's the lending side, but it's also about building relationships. And I was a marriage counsellor. Some of the conversations we had with the brokers, a psychologist, you really do. So lean on the people that you trust, the people that you've got the relationship with, because the information they might be able to give you, it could be life-saving and it really could help you.
Without a doubt, and you're quite right, and it's not a shameless plug at all, Jonathan, because I've just done the same thing for our account management functions within Sesame Bankhall Group, but they are there to listen, to support, and sometimes don't we all just need somebody to vent to, and actually once you've got it off your chest, you actually feel a little bit better. Hasn't done anything about it, but it's true, that age-old saying of a problem shared is a problem halved.
Definitely. Okay, and just sort of following on from the mental health first aiders that we have at Skipton, we've been speaking a lot about, how we can help brokers, how we can support them. But I think sometimes we need to look at, ourselves as well. How can we help ourselves when we're going through things? In Skipton, I'm absolutely privileged to work with an employer that supports so many colleagues. We've got a menopause network at Skipton. It's a forum for women and males, so people can be educated on it. They have monthly meetings. They've got external speakers that come in, and they have open days at the head office. And it really does, speaking to some of my colleagues that have actually been through it, and people that need the support of that network at the moment, that it really does help when they've got the forum to ask questions and sort of discuss the topic, which is a lot of men really don't know about it. Personally, I'll be honest, I really don't know much about it. Speaking to a female colleague this afternoon, she also, even being a female, didn't really know much about the subject. So Steph, I know this is really close to your heart. We also had World Menopause Health Day on the 18th of October. So now that we've got you here, would you like to share some of your story with the listeners?
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to. And you're quite right. This is a really, really important topic. I think it is getting, fortunately, and not unfortunately to a certain extent, fortunately because of celebrities like Davina McCall, it has become a topic that actually is being spoken about. And you're quite right. Actually, a lot of women don't know it's coming. There's so many different signs of menopause and symptoms to menopause. It's sort of, if I'm honest, it's one of those things that comes up and sort of slaps you in the face, if I'm honest. And it's not until you actually really, sometimes are in the depths of it, that you realise actually, what you're struggling with, and that there is support, and where do you go for support? So I'm happy to share briefly my story. So I went through early menopause due to an impact of sort of fertility issues I'd experienced in my late 20s. So I'm in my mid-30s and I'm struggling with a whole range of symptoms. I'm going to get a bit personal here, Jonathan, so there you go. So night sweats, recurrent urine infections. I slept really, really badly. Mood swings. My periods were really, really erratic. And, that can catch you out by surprise as a woman sometimes, which isn't great when you're visiting people's offices or sat like this, when you need to be. And the biggest pieces for me was crippling anxiety. I wouldn't have even been able to come and meet you in reception today, let alone sit here and do this. And the memory loss. I mean, memory loss was so bad, I thought I was suffering early onset dementia. Because of my age, I kept going to the doctors with all these things that I was struggling with. And because I hadn't had a hot flush, every single doctor I saw just fobbed me off. No, you're too young. You're not having hot flushes. You're not going through menopause. I started to do a little bit of reading, and I suddenly started to think, hang on a minute, I've got all these symptoms. If it's not menopause, what on earth is going on with me? And I had a whole host of sort of tests and different things. And it wasn't until it's nearly 4 years of backwards and forwards and really, really struggling and doing this in silence as well. So I wasn't telling anybody at work. I wasn't telling my friends. My husband probably wondered what on earth he was sharing a house with. And finally, I got one doctor to refer me to a consultant. I think I just sort of broke down and sort of said, please just refer me. I'm lucky enough to have private medical insurance. Just refer me to a consultant. I was in that consultant's office 5 minutes. He took one look at my notes, went, oh, you're going through menopause. He said, you need HRT. Here's a prescription. Boom. And I walked out the door. There was initial relief, I think. There was that initial, oh, actually, I've got a diagnosis. So somebody's listened to me. I'm not going through early onset dementia. Somebody's listened to me. Tinged with, I'm only in my mid-30s. How can I be going through menopause? What does that mean? This is very final for any sort of further decisions or anything else I want to do with my life. And all my friends around me are thinking, you know, they're in their, sort of, as I said, mid-30s and thinking, oh, maybe I'll have another baby. And I'm thinking, well, I've got a whole other sort of challenge over here. And it took me quite a long time, even though I got that prescription for my HRT, it took me quite a long time to actually go and step into the chemist. And actually, it was a friend of mine in the end who was like, go to the chemist, get those patches, bring them up here, and I will slap one on so we can actually get you back to some sense of normal and get you back to being you again. And that was 5 years ago. And I was, within a couple of months, I was a completely different woman. I'm going to put a caveat on HRT isn't right for everybody. But for me, it was life-changing and life-saving to a certain extent, Jonathan.
Thank you for being very vulnerable there. It's such a brave thing to talk about, especially when it's gone out to listeners. So, Steph, if you could just help the listeners understand, you know, what were your coping mechanisms and how did you manage to hold your high-powered job and your career at the same time with dealing with all this excess and extra hardship in your life? So,
well, I would like to say I had loads of coping mechanisms, and I didn't have loads. I think for me, I really struggled because I was doing this quietly. I didn't think I had anybody to go and talk to, Jonathan, if I'm honest. So I would, so I'll give you an example. So I would be really anxious to come and do a review meeting. So something that you and I do together day in, day out, but I would be really anxious coming into that meeting to meet you. Not because you're not lovely, but I would be really anxious going into that review meeting. And then, so I'd pull myself together and I'd really, really send up. I'd get myself so worked up. And then we'd do the review meeting. You wouldn't know any different because it sort of felt like I had to put this mask on. I had to be somebody completely different to get that confidence to go through with it. And then I'd come out and then I'd spend the whole rest of the day questioning, oh, I bet he did realise something. I bet he did notice something. What does he think of me? What does he think about what I've delivered? Oh, that's going to go back into work. And I've not, so not only am I anxious before I go in, I'm then anxious on the way out. And actually, from your perspective, you'd know no different. So actually, would it have been more helpful if actually I could have been a bit more open about that? Because actually I'd have saved myself all of that stress and strain and concern. So what did I do about that? Diet and exercise really worked in. So getting to the gym and trying to get some of that anxiety and that frustration out in a different way. And I did start to try and talk to a few people. So, but I think, for me, once I'd gone on to the HRT, literally that lifted in about 3 weeks and I felt like a completely different person. It wasn't until I started just sort of coming back out and I thought, oh, actually, hang on a minute. I don't feel anxious about going to meet Jonathan today, and I don't feel anxious about going to meet Paul. And that was all of a sudden, it was like, wow, to be honest with you, it was like Christmas come all at once.
Excellent. I can definitely relate to the feelings of anxiousness there and resonate with some of the things that you've been saying there for a personal level as well. So,
Jonathan, how did you, gosh, it's been, the last few weeks, but actually all the time, to be honest with you, it can be, we work in quite sort of pressurised jobs. Have you got coping mechanisms? Are there things that you could share as well? I've been vulnerable. I'm going to ask you to be vulnerable back.
You've been very vulnerable, and I think it's time for me to step up to the plate, and it's such a good platform to do it. So personally, for me, my mental health, everybody sees the confident, the laughter, that this confident person, and I am a lot of the time, and I'm usually normally very comfortable in social situations. I don't shy away from a party. I'm sure everybody knows, but genuinely, in the role that I've got, there's a lot of socialising in it. There's a lot of important people that you're dealing with, and that for me personally, there is an element of social anxiety that I have to deal with, and it's hard for people that don't understand it. They don't have it, But for me, certain situations, so it could be like today with the podcast, we know each other. I know everybody sitting in the room. But even though I know that and I'm comfortable, when that button gets hit to record, there is a bit of anxiety there. The hands start trembling a bit, the heart rate's up, and sometimes get a bit hot. So I think menopause, there's things that come out and it's about hot flushes, etc. I do have hot flushes as well in certain situations, not all the time, and it tends to be when it's a big event, up on a stage and you're having to deliver a presentation. So for me, it's about learning to regulate your breathing, really breathing deeply into your stomach, trying to relax and to try and control it. I've tried the whole meditating, I've tried all that stuff. Anybody that knows me, let's be honest, they know I don't meditate much. I'm not a very calm person a lot of the time. But yeah, and the other things that I've noticed as well is just with alcohol, really regulating and toning down the alcohol consumption. It really does work wonders for my mental health anyway. The other part that I've not added in yet is the exercise. Luckily, this is a recording and it's not a video. So for me, I really should pay more attention to exercising more to improve my physical health, which will then improve my confidence and my mental health.
Thanks for, oh wow, thank you, Jonathan. That makes, it's really hard hitting actually, and really, that's great for you to share. I think I would agree with you about exercise. I mean, it does make a massive difference finding the time, isn't it, as well? So that's back to being kind on yourself, finding the time, getting that balance. I find for me, sleep works as well. I find the more tired I am, I don't know if that's something you resonate with.
Totally, yeah.
The more tired I am, the more I find it's difficult to put some of those coping mechanisms into place.
Definitely. Thank you so much for coming in. It's been really enjoyable. Is there anything else you want to cover off about the market or anything that we've covered before we tie it up?
No, I think, thank you very much for having me, Jonathan, for definite bit of a diverse topic subject, but hopefully really interesting for our readers. I think for me, just touching back on that market piece as well, I know it's been a really, really stressful time for the intermediary sector as all, but as we go through such complicated and confusing times, actually the need for guidance and support for customers has never, ever been clearer. So actually for us as intermediaries, advice wins, advice is needed. So be there to support your customers and let them know you're there.
Yeah. Shout from the rooftops and let your customers know you're there to help.
Thank you.
Thank you. Skipton Talks with Derek Adams and Jonathan Evans. Brought to you by Skipton Building Society for Intermediaries. Subscribe now.